Alright, the date is Sunday, March 13th. The year is 2022. My name is John Molden. I'm the owner at Blood, Sweat, and Tears Concrete. And this is No Crying in Concrete. Alright, Carly.
Yes.
What is the question we will be answering this week?
Why does my concrete crack?
Yep, why does concrete crack? There's many reasons. We're going to cover a few of them. Maybe you recently had some concrete work done and noticed some cracking a day or two later. You're probably thinking your contractor screwed up and this concrete you spent all this money on is going to quickly deteriorate. Well, there's a slight chance you may be right, but most likely, it's nothing to lose sleep over. So, hey Magnus.
Yeah.
Have you seen the cracks in Grandma's porch?
Yes.
Yeah, they're kind of ugly, aren't they? Have they changed at all since the first time you noticed them?
No.
No? No, they haven't. When we poured Mom's slab, what was it, 9 years ago or something? No? We had a couple cracks show up the next day in two different areas of the slab. And we talked about possibly replacing them if they opened up over the years, and they basically stayed the same ever since the next day, so they've held up pretty well. We're going to take a look at the main types of cracks tonight, how they happen, and what we can do to avoid them. Hopefully this will put your mind at ease. We will cover 6 types of cracks tonight. Carly, what are the cracks we will be covering?
We will be covering shrinkage cracks, expansion cracks, overloading cracks, settling cracks, crazing cracks, and crusting cracks.
Very good. Magnus, did you know there were so many types of cracks in concrete?
No.
You didn't know? How many do you think there was?
1.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of thought I was a crack when I was your age too. So the first one we're going to be covering is shrinkage cracks or plastic shrinkage cracks. There's a little difference between the two of them. We'll cover them both. When your concrete is first poured, it has water in it to make it workable. As the water escapes while it dries, there's a certain amount of shrinkage that will occur. Shrinkage cracks are normally narrow at first. They are, however, quite often through the entire depth of the slab. Plastic shrinkage cracks are brought about by rapid drying because of wind, weather, or subgrade, and often stay shallow. So anyways, think of it like this. As the slab shrinks, it actually moves. It shrinks to the center. Hopefully it only cracks in the control joints, but there is always a chance it may crack between the joints. Magnus, do you know what a control joint is? Do you know what a control joint is? What is it?
It's the lines in your concrete.
It's the lines that we put in the concrete, correct. Your contractor should use control joints at certain intervals depending on the depth of the concrete. And that gives the concrete a place to crack. That's why they are there. Unfortunately, even when we follow all the guidelines, sometimes cracking outside the control joint still does occur. Carly, do you know what happens to concrete when it gets hot outside?
It expands.
That's right, it expands, it grows. Just about like everything, except for water, it grows. So, over time, as concrete expands and contracts, the cracks will open when it's cool and close when it's hot. So when it's cool, everything shrinks back, the cracks open up, you walk on it, you get dirt into the cracks, and then the hot weather comes back, swells everything up, and it walks apart. That dirt in there doesn't allow it to shrink back together. It has to walk apart from one another. And that just keeps repeating over the years until you've got really wide cracks in your concrete. So this is why reinforcing is such a good thing. It doesn't stop the slab from cracking, but it keeps the cracks tight when it does crack. Magnus, what happens to concrete when you add water to the mix?
It melts? Or is this not the right condition? Oh, it'll be mushy.
It'll be really like soupy, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. The concrete should be poured at the proper consistency. We call that the slump. If the concrete is too loose, it's easier to work with, but it loses much of its strength. It's just too diluted at that point. Another thing we can do is put polyethylene fiber expansion joint along any climate controlled foundations that we're pouring outside, around poles where it could shrink and crack against, plumbing that passes through it, or any other jut in the side of the house where it's going to be putting stress on the concrete as it shrinks. We use the polyethylene expansion because it gives a lot. It's a lot more of a cushion than the old fiberboard. Carly, what time of the day do the guys normally pour concrete in the summer?
2 to 3 o'clock, possibly even 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there. 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning usually is when the concrete gets there, or at least when they get there to get ready for it. Hot weather and wind are the main cause of plastic shrinkage cracks. Starting early in the morning is really a necessity when it's hot out. If it's too windy, finishing aids can be used to save the day, but if your contractor isn't willing to spend the money to have it on hand, the pour should be postponed in that kind of weather. Magnus, have you noticed that at Aunt Tammy's house, the concrete starts right up against her house foundation and goes all the way to the block wall?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a perfect scenario for expansion cracks. This type of crack may not surface until weeks or months later. It's worse when you pour in the winter time and then the hot weather comes and expands it, rather than when you pour when it's hot already. It's already expanded when it goes down. In the heat, concrete expands like most everything else. If your contractor didn't provide a cushion with polyethylene, asphalt, or fiber expansion, the pressure will result in a crack. The scenario at Tammy's house is the perfect one, where there's something locking it in on either side. We installed expansion along the wall and gave it a place to grow to so that the concrete won't be bound up and it won't crack that way, and it won't push the wall out either. So, Carly, what do you think would happen if a full concrete truck parked in your mom's spot out in the driveway?
It might crack.
Yeah, a good chance it would. I like to think that our concrete is super awesome and could withstand a concrete truck, but
Because it was made for a car and a regular sized truck, not a concrete truck.
exactly. It was poured 5 inches thick with a rebar grid, 4,000 psi concrete, but the concrete truck is pretty dang heavy.
Yeah.
So this is where you'd have overloading cracks, and a big part of overloading cracks or avoiding them is making sure you've got enough thickness to the concrete, but also the concrete can be ordered in various PSI or pounds per square inch. Here in Tucson, the majority of contractors are using a 2,500 or 3,000 PSI mix. 4,000 PSI mix is minimum in parts of the country with frost line. And we pour about 50% of our concrete is 4,000 PSI in Tucson. I just checked recently, and it's about half and half, 3,000 to 4,000. So have a discussion about what your slab will be used for ahead of time. If there's any doubt, go thick and heavy. The higher PSI mixes have a lower permeability as well and outperform as far as longevity goes. They're going to be less susceptible to the weather and everything else over the full 30-year life of the product. Magnus, how many times have we had to replace our driveway that you can remember?
And I think 0.
Think so? How about you, Carly? You remember ever replacing the driveway?
Nope.
No. No, and you normally only pour a driveway, patio, or a foundation once in the life of your home. So, this is definitely not the time to take the cheap route on something like this. You should also consider using reinforcing like we've talked about before. Whether your contractor uses fiber reinforcing rebar or mesh, which we don't really recommend. You know, the benefits of using reinforcing are huge, put it that way, as far as longevity goes. So Carly, what might cause a settling crack?
Like in last week's episode, we talked about how when we had the big hole dug in the front yard because of the plumbing. If you were to just pour some concrete into that, it would settle and crack for sure.
Exactly. Yep, settling cracks. If a large tree was recently removed, a utility trench was filled without compacting, or any other type of big hole was recently filled in, it's important that you let your contractor know. Your slab is only as good as the ground below it. Once the concrete's in place, you can still have a settling problem. And the scenarios to watch out for there are, like if you had a water line break and it washed the dirt out from underneath the slab. If there's a scenario where rain can wash alongside of it and it starts pulling the dirt out from underneath it if the edge wasn't turned down. Or I've seen one living in one time where the rodents actually burrowed underneath it and made a big hollow under there. And the living room floor actually started caving in the house. So, those are all settling cracks. Magnus, have you ever seen this on concrete in Tucson? Have you seen it? Have you seen that one? Okay. So, these are examples of crazing cracks. And this is a very common occurrence in Tucson. If you live anywhere in the south, you've probably noticed concrete that looks like it is like a spider web, or it's got hexagons all in it. And it becomes most noticeable when it first starts to rain. You really see it pop out. The cause of crazing is the surface of the slab drying out early. So if the slab is kind of sealed up too early, and you've got some windy, warm conditions, the hydraulic pressure below the concrete that's curing and the moisture coming out causes all those cracks in the surface as it's breaking through. So even though it can be pretty unsightly, looks pretty bad, it's not a structural problem. Good finishing techniques will minimize the problem of crazing cracks. Carly, do you know what the concrete finish around the border of our driveway is?
The stamping.
Stamped concrete, yeah. We did exposed aggregate in the middle and a stamped border on it. So the cracks you get pretty often with stamping are called crusting cracks. Crusting cracks occur on the most aggressive areas of the stamp. So where the stamp is deepest that you drive into the concrete, that's where you'll often get cracks along the edge of that. It normally happens when it's excessively warm or windy and the surface of the concrete may become brittle before the slab is set up tight enough to take a stamp. The stamp will sometimes open a crack in the surface. Now your finisher can hide the crack somewhat while they're, the surface is still pliable while they're finishing. They can just push it in with their thumb. Once it's set up a little bit, you can knock them in with a hammer. Or even when you get back to seal, you can take some antiquing and just fill the cracks as you're putting the sealer on. Like crazing, this is only cosmetic and not a structural problem. One time when I was working for Mold and Concrete in Danvers, Minnesota at one time, we set up a small patio that morning and we ordered the concrete, and before the truck could get there the wind came up crazy, and we still poured it. We got it down, we got it screeded, we got it covered with antique release real quick, and we kind of figured that we might be alright with it. Once we started putting the stamp on it, the crusting cracks were so bad in it that we just ended up pulling the form out of the end and loading it up into the dump truck and doing it again the next morning. But that's probably the most extreme case I've ever seen in my career. I'm sure Dude Molden remembers that one pretty well. So as long as your contractor follows the basic rules of concrete, you'll most likely have to live with the cracks. Check the concrete warranties in your area and just, make sure that there's not different than here in Arizona. The crack opens up large enough to insert a dime here within your warranty period. Any sections affected are going to be replaced basically. So. Choose an experienced team with veteran finishers and let your contractor know all you can about what your requirements may be. Remember, a good contractor hates cracks even more than you do. Become a team and bring in the concrete supplier to have a mix designed especially for your needs. Can you guys think of anything else we need to add tonight?
Not really.
No? How about you, buddy? You don't need to add anything? Alright, thank you for taking the time to watch again this week. We'll be back next Sunday from the Backyard Kitchening answering questions you didn't know you needed to ask about concrete. Remember, there's no crying in concrete other than tears of joy brought about by a job well done. Say goodbye, guys.
Bye.